Thank you so much for joining me today, Sapha. You are my very first guest on my brand new TV show. I am so excited to have you today.
I am so excited and honored. This is great.
Oh my gosh. So Sapha and I met because we're both Women Thrive speakers for the event that is coming up in March. And I have had the pleasure of being on Sapha's podcast. And I've also done an Instagram live with Sapha. And man, I just love your perspective on all of the things that have to do with women's empowerment. And we've had really good conversations about relationships and how trauma impacts those. And so today, that is what I wanted to focus on because you have seen it in your work. And I think you also have some perspective in your personal life. And so I just wanted to delve into my first question for you is what have you seen be some of the biggest impacts that having a traumatic past has had on relationships? And I mean
Mhm.
specifically intimate relationships to start.
Mhm. I okay, I love this question because I'm going to take it in two different directions. So, for those of you who don't know me, I specialize in really helping people, women specifically, reattune to their power and to their personal self and to reclaim their sovereignty. And so, the reason I bring that up is for me, one of the relationships that is most affected by trauma growing up is the relationship to self. It's one of those where, like, it's so interesting to me. We always focus on the relationships with our children, with our family, with our friends, with our lovers, with our spouses, like all of this. We focus, all of the external relationships always come first in the narrative of our world. And while that is important, and I will touch on that as well, I think that we often miss the mark and that we forget the most long lasting and also most pivotal relationship we ever get to have is with the self. And when you've gone through trauma in your life, and I'll speak from personal experience as well as from what I've seen with the women that I've gotten to work with over the last 10 years or so, is that I notice that there is this vast divide between the self and the trauma, meaning the trauma takes place. And of course, there's a compartmentalization that happens internally. And I mean, I could get into the psychology of it, but we're going to be here all day if I do that. So there is something that happens internally, our subconscious processes the trauma, the pain, the information, and our ego steps in to protect us, to create narratives that are going to then allow us to not experience that pain, that trauma, that thing. And yet, in so doing, very often perpetuates the dynamics. And the perpetuation often starts with self. So if you are someone who grew up, for example, I use myself, if I grew up in a household that felt very uncertain and things felt very up in the air a lot. There wasn't a place where I felt like I could land safely. So I didn't feel like I could land safely anywhere in my life. As a matter of fact, for most of my life, I felt very displaced. I felt like I didn't have a home. I felt like I didn't even have a self. And so a lot of my internal struggles that presented on in life later, it to include eating disorders that also had to do with how I was perceived or treated in school and bullied and all of these things. And we can get into that later if you want, but it's a broader subject. But to include those things, that a lot of it came from this sense of displacement from childhood, from the lack of safety. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel cared for in the way that I wanted to feel cared for. And because that happened, as it pertained to my relationship to myself, the patterning was very similar. I related to myself as this thing outside of myself that I somewhat put up with because I just had no choice. But I started sacrificing her for the sake of the people around me because I believed, I internalized what was being told to me through this trauma, that was what I needed to do. I was basically an internal dialogue. And so the first thing I'd like to say is that the relationship with the self is the first to suffer because we compartmentalize, then we tend to relate to the self as other, and then we see ourselves as this external creature, and we start hyper focusing on the outside. The outside comes first, and the traumatized person, the self, the one that exists, the one that gets to live this life, comes dead last. Not even second. I mean, like dead freaking last. So that's the first aspect that suffers. And then what happens from there is the relationships that we sustain in our lives are affected because they'll be tinged by these colored glasses, this hue, this lens that we're looking through at the world from that moment on. Relationships get affected because what shuts down, and this includes the relationship to self, what shuts down is the ability to build intimacy. Because another part that shuts down is vulnerability, the ability to trust, and the ability to rest, to receive. It's really difficult for a person who's experienced trauma to receive, heck, compliments, love, care. It's difficult to lend, to understand trust when you've been in that place, because how can I trust when it's been very clearly exemplified to me that the world, the people around me are not trustworthy, and there is always an agenda behind them, and so we start losing touch with the things in our lives that build the level of intimacy that we need in our lives to sustain committed, long lasting, healthy relationships. And that includes the relationship to self. How can I have a relationship with someone if I don't believe that I am worthy? How can I build a relationship with someone if for me intimacy is scary and thereby I become hyper independent? One of the things that I hear most often from women is I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself to make this decision. I don't trust myself to go back to dating. I don't trust myself to leave this relationship. I don't trust myself to chase my dreams. So, trust, and then intimacy, and then a perception of selfhood. If one of those three pillars is not sustained and nourished and protected and grown from, our relationships are not going to be what they could, and they're going to suffer because of it. And it starts with the relationship to self.
In the relationships that I've seen, it seems like the partner does become a big focus. But to your point, it largely becomes the trauma survivor not being comfortable enough in their self.
I would agree 100%. And I think it's valid. Like, again, we do this really interesting thing as humans. We still continuously refer to ourselves as the other. It's like my mind and then my body, and we see these as like separate pieces and separate things that we have to lug around, almost like if we had to lug around a backpack every day, rather than understanding the wholeness of who we are. And the reason why that's important to that conversation is because it's so much easier for me to center everyone else in my life when I perceive myself as fractured, when I perceive myself as other than, when I perceive myself as this thing that I just like, I don't know, I deal with her on a daily basis. But if I understand myself as a whole being, as a whole creature, then it's so much easier for me to understand this isn't about playing the blame game. This isn't about transference. This isn't about that. It's about centering myself and going, listen, this matters in our relationship because I'm being affected by it. Some of it happens because the way that our nervous system works. We operate from a nervous system space where we don't even know. We operate from the subconscious as well. And we don't even know that we're operating from these things, right? These things just happen in our lives and we just go about our lives and we believe we're the ones like pulling the strings. But all along, if I'm someone who has been dysregulated for a very long time, if I'm someone who either got stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, right, for whatever reason, those aspects of self that feel like the fractal are going to show up. And when they show up as this single entity sort of leading the road or tasking me to do something, I'm going to feel very shattered.
Tell me, how did you identify this in yourself in order to really work on it?
Oh, man, it's been such a journey. I recently had one of these mornings when I woke up and I was like, oh man, if I could go back in time, because I think I was talking to myself about the journey itself. And I was like, if I could go back in time and just change it and tell myself, because I think a lot of times we want to amp ourselves up by saying, if I could go back and tell my younger self, these are the lessons, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And we can, in fact, mother and care and love on ourselves at that younger age, like as we are right now, we can do that. And
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have gone that hard. And I know that I would have not changed a single thing. And that is probably a really harsh thing to say for someone who's experienced trauma. But trust me, I have been there. And even with the scope of understanding of everything that that has entailed, I wouldn't. And the reason why is because it took me moving through the process of integrating, healing, loving, and understanding that I finally broke free. So the journey has been crazy. So again, I didn't feel like I had a place when I was young. I felt I hated myself. I really hated myself. I was I felt that I was too much, too big, too verbose. To this day, I'm very verbose and I love that now, but I used to hate that. And I felt like I just didn't fit and I wanted to crawl out of my skin almost. And information and things kept happening in my world that kept feeding into that to the point where I just really wanted to disappear. I wanted to be invisible. And one of the ways in which I wanted to make myself be invisible was by not eating. So it was like the smaller I got, the more attention I received. And then it was like a reward, as like saying, yeah, keep shrinking yourself, keep giving your power away, keep diminishing your light, keep pretending that you are this thing that you are not, and keep being little so that we can approve of you and love you and actually welcome you. And so it became this really weird thing. And so what it took was me breaking down in the middle of a yoga class once in a pigeon pose. I tell the story all the time, but it's so true. I was in pigeon pose and I just started ugly crying, like snot running down my face. And I couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with me. Because up until then, I'd been fighting the thing. I had gone to school and I'd studied psychology, but I didn't really like, even then, I was like, yeah, I have an eating disorder, but it was like a dismissive thing. It was like, I'm not going to deal with it. I want to focus on everyone else. And so it wasn't until that day that I was like, no, I legitimately hate myself. And that feels really awful. And I feel like that's what's opened the door to a lot of mistreatment in my life. And little by little, and I want to stress this because I think sometimes we believe that the second we find that thing, that answer, that doorway, that pill, that book, that podcast, that something, that therapist, we believe that if we find that one thing, everything is going to be fixed like this. And it doesn't happen that way. That's why I say it was a journey, because it started with that. It started with that, but that is like such a small thing. That's not why I was able to break free of like a toxic marriage that lasted, by the way, 13 years. And I stress this because I want people to know I've been in the way of doing this for a very long time. And I've been in the way of helping women heal their relationship to food and self for a long time through yoga, through nutrition. However, all the while, as I was healing myself from all of my trauma, from narcissistic parent and like sexual abuse and all of these things when I was younger, I was healing from that. I was healing from the eating disorder too. I was healing from a lot of things. And all the while, as I was doing that, it was like peeling back one layer after another, right? Not to use the onion like example too much because everybody does, but it was like peeling one layer at a time. I was still deeply embedded in relationships. And I'm not only just saying like the marriage, but I'm saying relationships, plural, friendships, businesses, heck, like I wasn't even careers. I was embedded in situations in my life that were completely out of tune with who I was. And little by little, they started to fall to pieces and crumble. And it was first the business and it was the friendships then. And then finally, by the time I was ready to say, I am someone I love deeply and I am worthy of this life, the last piece felt, which was that old relationship. And it was difficult and it was painful. And every step of the way has demanded more of me than I could have possibly ever imagined. And it has been worth it. And I wouldn't change a single thing. I would have it all be the same. I would have it all be the same, even on days when I'm like, man, if I could go back and tell myself, don't date this person, no, I would, because it has taught me and it has opened the doors for me to get here. And it's really what it's done is it's allowed me to fall in love with myself, but it's also allowed me to fall in love with my life because it's so difficult to feel like you're just going through the motions as a traumatized person and like your life is meh. It's a
Yeah.
story someone else gets to live for you. You don't even get to enjoy it. Man, that is so painful. So no, now I get to like sink my teeth into this life, and I think it's wonderful.
I think that a lot of trauma survivors feel that way. They hate themselves. They feel responsible for what happened to them. Why couldn't I stop it? Why did I let it happen? All those feelings. And it's so deep and painful to revisit that. How hard was that to start
Yeah.
to really hit on that component of how much you hated yourself and get there to where you do you forgive yourself and love yourself
Mhm.
now.
It was hard and it was scary, but Jesus, not to sound like just like one of these like woo people, but like it's true. It was hard and it was difficult, but it was worse for me to stay in the same place. And I think I was very vividly aware of that, even if it was just in my subconscious. I just had been so numb because that's the other thing that happens. It's first you have the pain and it's so intense. You really do feel like you're going to never make it. And then you just go numb. And I was so that scared me more. The numbness, and I've had clients who felt this too. That's the scariest bit, man, because once you go numb you really feel like you can't even love anymore, and not just yourself, I mean like anyone. So it got to the point where I was like, it's either this or there is no life to be lived. It was really hard. It was kind of like a hard thing to come to realize. And I say that, and at the same time too, it's so funny. I also have this temperament though. I'm the kind of person who's never shied away from emotional pain or from discomfort or from fear at an internal level. Like, I mean, I was a chicken person when I don't know if I can curse, but I was a chicken when I was growing up. And I was afraid of everything on a physical level. But
Yeah, that's different.
internally, yeah,
Yeah.
internally, I was never afraid to go there. And I'm still that person. And I'm that person with my clients. Like, I always say that I'm the queen of sacred discomfort. And I say like if you really are someone who is willing to sit and listen and observe and love even in the midst of the pain, remembering that no matter what, you are going to be okay. You got you, I got you, this life has you. If you're willing to go there, it can change. And because that's how I felt, and for a long time I didn't even have support because I didn't understand the importance. I have support now. Like, and I know there are days where if I feel like, for example, if I'm ever doing introspection and I touch a point that I know I can't fully get there, I'm like, I need someone outside of myself to guide me there. That's why I like guides and coaches and mentors and therapists, because there's only so much I can do on my own. But for a very long time, I was trying to do it all on my own. And it just, it prolonged the process. Plus, it also gave me a way of sidestepping certain things. It gave me a way of like dodging the things that I thought would be like, oh no, that's too re-traumatizing. I'm not going to go there. And it's a it's a very nuanced conversation. This, I think we need like 5 hours to get into this because it's such a nuanced speak. We want to be able to hold the possibility of yes and for ourselves. Like, yes, this is going to be painful. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, we're going to need a lot of support. And yes, we're going to need someone to ground us. And yes, we're going to need new tools and new systems. And yes, those things can change. And it's one step at a time. It's literally one breath at a time, even not even one step, one breath at a time, because there are days where you do want to step back. And there are days where you, no, don't go there right now. You're not ready for it. And there are days where you need to just be very gentle and loving with yourself, because the thing is, that you're right. We play the blame game a lot with ourselves, especially when it's happened to us. It's happened to us, by the way. It's not as if we made it happen. One of the things that drives me most crazy in the spiritual community, because I'm a spiritual girly, like I call myself a priestess, I'm priestess trained, like I'm a spiritual woo person. But I cringe when I say stuff like that, because one of the things that drives me most crazy in this world is when people say, like, oh, well, you attract these things to you. And I'm like,
Oh,
I
oh,
I
Sapha,
could
agree.
punch someone.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
I,
That is so, that's like adding trauma to trauma.
oh, it,
Unbelievable.
I'm like sweating just saying
Unbelievable.
that.
Me
Just
too.
sweating
I'm
saying that.
sweating hearing you say that because it just makes me so, you have no idea the pain these people are under,
It's
and the mixed
terrible.
feelings. And then to add that is
It's
just
terrible.
horrible.
You can't say that. Or the whole like just let it go thing. Ooh. I
Yeah,
listen.
that too. Mm.
I think we need to get better versed as humans at having conversations that hold the possibility of more. Understand our psychological existence, our neural pathways, we barely are scratching the surface of them. Okay. Nobody knows the everything, the end all be all of everything for how this works. So we can say, we can't just be like, oh, you no, like, are we walking paths that are similar and familiar to us because this is all we have known? Yes. And that is not our fault. It's not about blaming. Are we looking for the consistency of the thing that we have known for a while? Yes, but that is not our fault, and it's not that we are making it happen. Like anyway, the point is, before I get on a diatribe, because I can, and it makes me very angry, but before I go there, it's the point is that we want to know that the healing journey is going to invite the possibility of sitting with this very uncomfortable thing and going beyond that for our sake, for not for the sake of letting go, and not for the sake of forgiveness. Man, forgiveness is another one that also I'm like, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not gonna forgive. Like,
It's
and
not that easy.
no, and you don't owe your forgiveness to anybody either. Like, this is a thing that we grant. Forgiveness and trust are both granted, not earned. So these are conversations that we need to be having, especially in the trauma space, because we deserve it, because we deserve better. We deserve the space to know, man, I'm blaming myself for something that is not my fault. And I want to reframe that. And I want to see a way through. And I don't think I can right now. And right now, this feels so final and so complete that I feel like it's going to tear me to pieces and destroy me completely. And even in presence of that, I want to walk through that underworld. I want to walk through that fire. And I want to believe that there is going to be a way out. And sometimes that belief isn't even there, other than I just want to believe that it's there. And someday it becomes palpable, and someday it becomes your truth. And someday you make it out. And you do make it out.
This is exactly why I'm doing this show, is because I want to open everybody's eyes to how complex this is and the way it affects relationships and the way that we can communicate better with each other and have more understanding. That is the reason I'm doing the show. So I thank you for being so raw with that. My question to you is, if for that person out there that is terrified but ready
Yeah.
to really delve deep, addressing the shame and the guilt that they have, where would you recommend they start?
Everyone is so unique, but I would say start with the possibility of more. Start with the possibility of asking questions that are going to feel gentler to you. Start with the possibility of seeing yourself as more than just this. Start with, even if you don't feel it, even if you don't believe it, even if you fight this statement with every fiber of your being, start with knowing that you are worthy of more and better. And start with believing that you can hold yourself through it. That's the starting point, because from there, you are going to be your best guide. You are going to be the one that knows the kind of medicine you need. You are going to be the one that is going to decide what is going to sit best with your nervous system, what is going to sit, and you probably don't even know much about that yet, but you're going to be the one that like feels that best for yourself in that moment. And I would also say start with opening the door to the possibility, to circle back to this, that you deserve more, because I think a lot of times we get ourselves stuck in situations that we think this is just the way that it's going to be forever, and it's not. And I promise you it's not. So start with compassion for self, and start with being willing to ask, what would be the more, what would be the next, what would that look like, even if it feels like a dream that is never going to happen, it's only meant for the movie stars. Even if it feels that way, start with just, what would that possibility be like? And because once you start asking that, all of a sudden this thing and the things that you were just settling with and the things that were just kind of showing up, they start losing their flavor. They don't feel the same anymore. I experienced that very clearly with my eating disorder right away. But like, what would the more be like? And it was the immediate sweating and the, oh my God, but if I gain weight, blah, 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 like it was, and I was like, yeah, but what would it be like though? Like, really, what would it be like if I just let go of the grip? What would it be like if I let go of the shame? The thing about shame, and I'm glad that you brought that up before I meander, is anything that is shaming and guilting you into submission. And this includes your personal life. If you are shaming yourself and guilting yourself into submission, you're enslaving yourself. It will enslave you. If you want to break free of the chains, the conversation has to shift, and it's a redirect. I'm not even saying let it go. I'm just saying redirect. This is shameful to you. Okay, tell me about it, and tell me the story of the shame. Tell me what it has been like, what it has felt like, what it has like, you know, looked like, palpable taste buds. Like, I want to know everything. What is that like for you? That is what I mean when I say the possibility of asking the question of more. Okay, if this feels shame filled, tell me more about that. Like, let's have a conversation with that, so that we know what the link is that we can hit with that chisel and hammer to break yourself free from those chains. And it is very possible. I see it on a daily basis. But yeah, I would say start there, and also start knowing that no one is expecting perfection of you, and that no one is expecting for you to break free like in 2 seconds. And if you are expecting that, it's okay, because we all do. And just it's just a reminder. So okay, I did expect that. It didn't quite happen. Okay, that's fine. I'm not back at zero. I'm not a failure. I didn't mess up, because that's the thing about healing, especially healing from trauma. We think that a lot. We think, man, I thought I was doing so much better, and now here I am again having the same conversations, or doing the thing again. And it's like, that's just more shame and more guilt. Pause for a moment and recognize, yeah, you're moving in that direction, but you have a history that is being changed and transformed, and you have to step one step at a time, one little bit at a time. Everything is going to be slowly changing. It's slow and steady wins the race, though, and it will happen.
So what I hear you saying is identify that you have these feelings,
Yeah.
put it out into the universe, ask more questions, and the answers will become more clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Thank you so much, Safa. I think that you have done an amazing job of speaking to how it feels, how it felt for you, and where people can begin to start if they are feeling this way by identifying it and just asking the questions. Thank you so
Mm.
much.
Thank you so much.